I would appraise this book actually at about $40,000.
There is a certain kind of person who seems too calm for television. Someone who walks into a room full of cameras, nervous sellers, and the controlled chaos of a reality show, and yet carries themselves as though they are simply having a quiet conversation in a library. Rebecca Romney was that person. And for years, audiences across America watched her appear on Pawn Stars and wondered the same thing. Who exactly is this woman, and how did she end up in a Las Vegas pawn shop appraising books worth more than most people's cars? The answer, it turns out, is stranger, richer, and far more interesting than anything the show ever revealed. Rebecca Romney was born in Phoenix, Arizona, in 1985, and nothing about her early life suggested she would one day become one of the most recognizable rare book experts in the United States. She was not raised in a household full of antiques or surrounded by scholars. She was simply a curious young woman who fell in love with ideas. That curiosity drove her to Brigham Young University, where she studied philosophy and classical studies between 2003 and 2007. While most of her peers were pursuing more practical degrees, Rebecca was spending her afternoons translating ancient Greek texts and debating questions of free will that had no easy answers. She graduated with honors, and along the way she had quietly done something remarkable. She had taught herself 5.5 languages: English, French, Japanese, Latin, ancient Greek, and a working knowledge of Old English. She once translated a papyrus fragment from 300 BC for a university exam and shocked her professors with the result. At the time, none of it seemed particularly marketable. She was a philosopher who could read dead languages. What was she going to do with that? In 2007, fresh out of college, Rebecca made what she later described as a mistake that changed her life. She applied for what she believed was a management position at Bowman Rare Books in Philadelphia. When she arrived for the interview, she realized she had misread the job posting. The role was for a rare book specialist, something she knew absolutely nothing about. Any sensible person might have turned around and left. She did not. She stayed, admitted her ignorance openly, and somehow walked out with the job. Her language skills, her academic background, her ability to read texts in their original forms, all of it made her exactly what a rare book firm needed, even if she did not know it yet. Within months, she was handling items that most people would never see in a lifetime. A Shakespeare First Folio from 1623. Pages from the Gutenberg Bible. First editions of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica. She was thrown into the deep end without warning, and she swam. By 2010, she had been promoted to gallery manager in Las Vegas, running the operation there at just 26 years old. By 2013, at 29, she became the youngest senior director in Bowman's history. In that role, she oversaw catalogs, private sales, and auction strategies that totaled more than $10 million in transactions annually. She was also quietly building a reputation for something that most dealers struggle with their entire careers: spotting fakes that no one else could identify. Rick Harrison did not find Rebecca through a casting process. He already knew her. The rare book and antique world in Las Vegas is smaller than most people imagine, and their paths had crossed through mutual contacts and shared events long before any camera was involved. When Rick needed an expert who understood not just the books themselves but the paper, the ink, the printing history, the provenance, he picked up the phone and called her directly. Her first appearance on Pawn Stars came in Season 4, on April 4, 2011. She was handed a collection of Civil War-era documents, including a Confederate bond from 1861 that the seller believed was worth several $1,000s. In under 10 minutes, Rebecca had identified a forged signature and adjusted the valuation accordingly. The segment was calm, precise, and completely riveting. Viewers had never seen someone dismantle a claim so quietly and so thoroughly. The ratings reflected it. Her debut episode saw a 15% jump in viewership. She was immediately brought back. Between 2011 and 2015, Rebecca appeared in approximately 30 episodes, handling everything from a replica of a 1493 Columbus letter to an original broadside of the Declaration of Independence. She authenticated a first edition of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, one of only 250 copies from the original 1859 printing, and valued it at $75,000. She examined what appeared to be notes connected to Edgar Allan Poe, hidden inside a manuscript that everyone else had dismissed as worthless. But the show presented all of this within a very specific frame. A person walks in with an object, an expert arrives, a value is announced, Rick tries to buy it for less. It is a clean and satisfying formula. What it does not show is the depth of preparation behind every one of those appraisals, the hours of cross-referencing, the knowledge of printing history, the understanding of how paper ages and how ink behaves across centuries. When Rebecca walked onto that set, she was not performing expertise. She genuinely had it. She also saved the show from some potentially costly embarrassments. In one instance, someone brought in what appeared to be a Shakespeare First Folio from 1623. Real copies of that book have sold for nearly $10 million. Rebecca examined the paper texture, the ink saturation, and the absence of certain printing flaws that authentic 400-year-old books always carry. She concluded it was a forgery, almost certainly inspired by a misleading collection from 1619. If the shop had purchased it, the financial and reputational damage could have been severe. In another case, a seller arrived with what looked like Revolutionary War bonds. On closer inspection, Rebecca identified them as Confederate-era documents that were linked to assets lost aboard the USS Republic, a ship that sank in 1865. The wreck had been discovered in 2003, and some of its contents recovered by 2005. These bonds carried legal complications that went far beyond their monetary value. Police were eventually contacted. Her careful research kept the shop out of what could have been a protracted legal dispute. In 2014, an episode aired that would quietly become the most talked-about moment of Rebecca's time on the show. A man walked into the gold and silver pawn shop carrying a rare 1841 edition of the Book of Mormon. Rebecca examined it and estimated its value at $40,000. After negotiation, Rick purchased it for $24,000. What happened next was never officially addressed by the History Channel, by the show's producers, or by Rick Harrison himself. But the rumors that spread through online forums and discussion threads told a consistent story: that the book had been stolen from the Marriott Library at the University of Utah, that federal agents became involved, and that the book was subsequently seized. Rebecca, according to these accounts, was questioned about how a stolen historical document of that significance had made it onto national television without triggering any red flags. Rebecca was never accused of any wrongdoing. No charges were ever made public. But the timing of what happened next is difficult to ignore. On January 10, 2015, Rebecca Romney appeared in what would be her final regular episode of Pawn Stars. She appraised a pirate book from 1734, valued it at $1,000, and watched Rick talk the price down to $400. It was an ordinary segment. There was nothing to suggest it would be the last time most viewers saw her in that shop for years. And then she was simply gone. No announcement. No explanation from the network. No farewell from Rick or the rest of the cast. The forums erupted with speculation. Had she been fired? Had she left voluntarily? Was her departure connected to the Book of Mormon controversy? Some viewers pointed to the growing criticism surrounding the show itself. Accusations that certain appraisals were staged, that deals were reconstructed for the cameras, that the authenticity the audience trusted was sometimes more performance than reality. What made the situation stranger was something that fans noticed almost immediately. Rebecca never removed Pawn Stars from her LinkedIn profile. She continued to list herself as the show's rare book expert, with her tenure described as running from 2011 to the present. Some took this as simple marketing. Others suggested it might be evidence of a non-disclosure agreement that prevented her from speaking publicly about the circumstances of her departure. She has never offered a detailed explanation, and the show has never provided one either. What the Pawn Stars narrative always obscured was the fact that Rebecca's professional life extended far beyond a Las Vegas pawn shop. In 2016, she relocated to Philadelphia to take a senior director position at Bowman Rare Books, overseeing library acquisitions and major catalog projects. She later worked in Brooklyn and eventually settled in Washington, D.C., where she would build something entirely her own. In 2017, she and her then-husband J.P. Romney co-wrote a book called Printer's Error: Irreverent Stories from Book History. Across 368 pages, they explored the forgotten and frequently bizarre history of the printed word, forged editions of Galileo's work, Charles Dickens's battles over copyright in the 1840s, and the enduring mystery of the Gutenberg Bible, which was printed in 1455 and never once mentioned Gutenberg by name. Only 48 copies of that Bible are known to survive, each worth tens of millions of dollars. The book was critically praised and sold strongly, giving Rebecca something that reality television rarely delivers: a respected intellectual reputation entirely separate from her screen presence. Also in 2017, she and Heather O'Donnell created the Honey and Wax Book Collecting Prize, an annual award of $1,000 given to women under 30 who had assembled the most original and meaningful book collections. The prize was not about the monetary value of the books collected. It was about intention, curation, and the stories that collections tell. By 2025, it had honored 9 women and inspired a wider conversation about gender and access within the rare book world. Rebecca had noticed something troubling. Women were consistently passionate about collecting but hesitant to claim the identity of collector. The prize was designed to change that. In 2019, Rebecca co-founded a rare book firm called Type Punch Matrix in Silver Spring, Maryland, alongside her business partner Brian Cassidy. This was not a boutique hobby operation. It was a serious commercial and intellectual enterprise. Within its first years, the company was moving inventory that included Shakespeare folios and Gutenberg Bible leaves, selling to elite private collectors, institutions, and libraries. By 2023, she was integrating technology into authentication processes in ways the industry had never seen before. Working with technology firms, her team began using AI and blockchain to document provenance, the chain of ownership that determines whether a rare book is what it claims to be. A test case involving a $50,000 Sylvia Plath manuscript demonstrated that the software could trace ownership back to 1956. Spectral ink scanners capable of detecting forgeries with 95% accuracy were brought into her authentication workflow. In 2024, one of these tools identified a forged 1493 Columbus letter that had fooled conventional examination. She brought these tools into her teaching as well. At the Antiquarian Book Seminars, which she has participated in annually since 2015, she has trained more than 200 dealers in authentication methods that were once confined to institutions like the Smithsonian. She teaches not just technique but history, the long and sometimes criminal history of forgeries, including the Thomas J. Y. scandal of the 1930s, in which more than 50 fake first editions fooled experts for decades. In February 2025, Rebecca published Jane Austen's Bookshelf, a work that arrived with a force that surprised even her most devoted readers. The book was an investigation into what she called the Great Forgetting, the systematic erasure of women writers who had shaped Austen's literary world but were subsequently lost from the canon. Frances Burney, Anne Radcliffe, Charlotte Smith. These were women who had been best-selling authors in the 18th century, with print runs in the thousands. Radcliffe had helped inspire Edgar Allan Poe, Mary Shelley, and the entire Gothic literary tradition. Charlotte Smith's poetry had directly influenced Wordsworth's career. Frances Burney novel Evelina, published in 1778, had sold 500 copies in its first run and laid groundwork that would eventually lead to Pride and Prejudice. And yet all of them had been largely erased. Rebecca's research revealed that only 10 to 15% of 18th-century novels written by women survive today, compared to roughly 40% of those written by men. This was not an accident of time. It was the result of decisions made by publishers, critics, librarians, and literary institutions that consistently valued and preserved male authorship over female authorship. The New York Times called the book sharp and fearless. The Washington Post called it thrilling. The Guardian described it as instinctive and electric. Within a few weeks of publication, it had sold over 20,000 copies. What struck readers most was Rebecca's admission that she herself had not encountered most of these women during her own education. She had read Richardson and Fielding. She had not read Charlotte Lennox or Maria Edgeworth, even though Austen had. Her own formation as a scholar had quietly erased exactly the voices she was now working to recover. In May 2025, Rebecca was invited to deliver a lecture at the Grolier Club in New York, the oldest and most prestigious society of book collectors in the United States, founded in 1884, with a global membership capped at 825. Her talk, titled Jane Austen's Bookshelf, Collecting as Investigation, traced the personal journey that had led her to the book, beginning with a Victorian edition of Frances Burney Evelina that she had stumbled across in 2023. She has also been expanding Type Punch Matrix into museum consulting, helping institutional collections acquire overlooked voices and underrepresented perspectives. In 2024, she helped curate an exhibit focusing on 18th-century Black writers. In 2022, she assisted the Lilly Library in acquiring 2,000 romance novels, a genre long dismissed as not worthy of serious preservation, for $250,000, completing the deal in just 16 hours. Her team in Silver Spring now includes 10 people. If her museum consulting model reaches its projected scale, It could bring in $2 million annually through institutional partnerships alone. The version of Rebecca Romney that most Americans know is the one who appeared on a television show about a pawn shop, walked in calmly, said something precise and slightly surprising, and walked out again. That version is real. But it is a very small slice of a much larger story. She is a woman who taught herself 5 languages, accidentally fell into a career she was made for, built an expertise that spans 4 centuries of printing history, helped expose frauds that would have cost collectors fortunes, and then, when the cameras stopped, kept building. She launched a firm. She created a prize. She wrote books that critics and scholars took seriously. She integrated technology into a field that had resisted it for generations. And she published a work of literary history that forced readers to reckon with how much had been lost and who had been responsible for losing it. The untold truth about Rebecca from Pawn Stars is not really about Pawn Stars at all. The show was just a door. What she built on the other side of it is the actual story, and it is still being written,